Attention inshore saltwater anglers, good news and bad news. The bad news is we are raising the price of the Salt Strong Insider Club by almost 50%, 50 here, very, very soon on June the 1st. The good news is that you can get in today and grandfather your rate in for life. So that means if you're a current member, this does not impact you at all. You are already grandfathered in for life at your rate. So you've got 30 days or less, depending on when you hear this, to get in the club, lock in your rate, because as soon as June 1st hits of 2024, we are raising the prices. After not raising them for 8 years, we have some really, really, really big news coming with smart fishing spots and essentially a fishing guide in your back pocket everywhere from Texas to Florida to New Jersey and everywhere in between. We're going to start giving free Slam Shady for life to all our members, free tackle to test out every single month, and a whole lot more. You do not want to miss out. So once again, if you're a current member and you're in good standing, you are completely fine. Your rate is locked in for as long as you're an active member. But if you're not, this is your last chance to join before the prices go up almost 50%. So join today at saltstrong.com. Here's the podcast.
This fishing, it's in my soul.
Welcome to the Salt Strong Podcast, disrupting fishing entertainment as you know it. Prepare to laugh. Prepare to get to know fishing legends in a whole new and unfiltered way. And on occasion, you might even learn a thing or two about fishing. Here's your host, Joe Simons. Like diamonds.
Hello, Salt Strong Nation. Joe Simons. Like diamonds, we are back again. Got a great guest. We recently had Kent Hickman, Mr. Gills himself, and Mr. PowerPole Redfish Tour himself. And I just found out an avid surfer that I didn't know about and a fellow Polk County friend. And we had Kent speak at a Salt Strong chapter event in Tampa, and he absolutely crushed it. He said all the things that we continue to harp over and over and over again about the importance of finding fish, the importance of the right tackle, and going down sometimes in the size of your rod and your reel and your line, et cetera, and the different ways to catch fish. If you've only caught redfish in particular on live bait, there's some other cool ways to do it that might even be more effective for you. And the one thing I like about Kent, I know even tomorrow he just told me that he's off to Louisiana. You know, when you're fishing in different spots, right? If you're from Florida and having to fish in Texas or vice versa, you can't rely on your same couple little honey holes. You got to get out there and sometimes get out of your comfort zone and use trends, use technology, use a network, whatever it might be. I know Kent's going to talk probably about all of that here in terms of finding redfish. So first and foremost, welcome to the show, my friend.
Yeah, and I really appreciate the invite. And of course, I love to talk about this stuff because it's what I've been living and doing for, 20 plus years now. And I can talk. And how long's your podcast? If I can go on and on and on, but we'll try to keep it, fun and simple. And I always like to, and your opening was perfect because, I take a lot of people fishing. I've been around a lot of some of the best anglers you've ever seen, guys that's won hundreds of thousands of dollars in tournaments, and fortunate to call them my friends. And I've been lucky enough to win 6 or 7 tournaments over the years and a lot of top 5s and 10s. So you learn a lot running the tournaments, you learn a lot fishing the tournaments, and you learn a lot traveling around. And just what you were saying in your opening, we have to travel to areas that we've never seen anything. And, we have buddies and we can look at Google Earth and we can look at some maps and, we can do some of these things. And of course, the more you do it, the better you get at it. Cause you just get that experience on what to look for and just, you just have a feel. Like some days I'll have a feel and it's like, there ain't no fish here. You get that feel too. And then some days you'll come around the corner and you're like, I'm getting ready to slay them. I can tell this area is lit up. Everything that I'm looking for is here. Typically for me, I'm a fairly shallow water guy. So 1 to 2 foot of water. I love to find mullet, broken bottom, grass and sand and shell and, maybe some oyster beds. But, one of the biggest, couple of the biggest things I see anglers do wrong is they fish a little too deep. And then we're basically talking about redfish here.
Yep.
Rarely catch redfish. Now, there's exceptions to every rule. Okay. But rarely do I catch redfish in more than 2 foot of water. Mainly because it's hard to find them when they're in deeper water anyway. There's just not just something there that's calling your name to find them. But they like edges. I like an edge can be a couple different. It can be a mangrove shoreline. It can be the edge of a sandbar. It can be the edge of an oyster bed. They like an edge. So if I see an area with an oyster bed and, some potholes that have mullet in it, it's 1 to 2 foot of water. Typically that's a pretty good redfish area. And like I said, 2 foot of water is about it. There's some scenarios in the nature coast where we catch fish in 3 and 4 and 5 foot of water. But for the most part, most of the fish and all these tournaments are caught in 1 to 2 foot of water.
And when you say edge, do you mean that there's some sort of a drop off? Because I think, people struggle with that. They hear 2 feet of water and then there's no deep water anywhere nearby. Are you saying that there's some sort of quick drop off? Is it a foot? Is it half a foot? Is it just any sort of depth change?
It can be. Great question. Because it can really be a subtle change. I took my brother not long ago, and he doesn't fish like I do. And we took my boat, and we were going into a flat, and it was about 3 foot where we started, and then we got to about 1 foot, and there was sort of, even though it was the same water, it wasn't like a rock edge or something it was like a grass edge where it was pretty obvious that the grass in front of us was about 1 foot and our boat was in about 2 foot. So it was more like just where you went from 1 to 2 foot. It was like the grassy edge of a flat.
Got it.
Where you could tell there was a difference in the level of water. And we caught a bunch of fish. We caught, 4 or 5. He caught them too. He was happy as he could be because he'd never even caught a redfish on artificial. So we caught, 4 or 5 redfish and had a great time. That was down in Inglewood. And, but, it could be, you go into a bay and you're grinding in there. Maybe you're on your troll motor and it's 10 or 12 inches to get around the corner. And then out in the middle of this little bay, some mullet are jumping out there and you get out there and it's about 2 foot of water. That's a good spot, to put the wind at your back. If you can, put the sun at your back. If you can, make those long casts into those pods of mullet with, numerous baits from, a lot of the baits you guys have are perfect for redfish. I've used them myself, the dart baits and I think it's a twitch, y'all call it. It's a great redfish bait.
Well, did you hear we changed the name? Did you hear we changed the name to? You're going to appreciate it. It's the Polk County Tweaker. Okay.
See, I love it. So the Polk County Tweaker, if you just had to fish, if you just wanted to pick one bait, because this is something that new guys do, they won't be catching a lot of fish. So they start switching baits. And it's really not the bait all the time. It's just you're not where fish are eating, because they're going to, redfish is pretty aggressive. So you know that Polk County Tweaker style of bait has been winning redfish tournaments for decades. And you can fish it weedless. You can fish it on a jig head. And I like to have it both ways. If I'm getting in some real grassy stuff and it's tailors or something like that, it's great to have a weedless rod set up. So you can, of course, they cast a mile. That's the other thing. They're bullets, So I always have kind of scenario set up and I'm a bouncer. If you ever watch me work a rod, I'm a bouncer. So I like to, pop them, real pop, bounce them on the bottom, bounce. If I'm in a real heavy grassy area, I'll go to like the paddle tail style and slow roll it over that grass. Cause if you're bouncing in grass, you can get a lot of grass that way.
Yeah.
So if it's a sporadic, cause if a bottom is kind of broken up a little bit, I just try to bounce them, and redfish love the bounce. They just love that bounce.
I want to go back to something because you said it twice, mullet. Is that one of your kind of key triggers? Like if you're in the flats and you're feeling good and you're seeing mullet, you're like, all right, we're going to stop and fish this.
Absolutely. I literally almost will not fish an area unless I see mullet.
Wow.
Now, some days you go out, you don't see mullet anywhere. Okay. So what are you going to do then? You got to find some other signs of life. Maybe it's some bait or birds or something like that. But, and I talked about this at my seminar. I literally just had it one of my last fishing trips. And I know we're going to talk about like fishing new places. So the first part of my trip, I said, well, I'm going to look for, some new areas, stuff I hadn't fished in a while. Let's just take a look at it. I like to, we're creatures of habit. We all like to go to our same little spots and things like that, even myself. And I looked and looked. I could not find a mullet. And I was on my trolling motor. It was like a trolling motor zone area for probably an hour.
Wow.
And finally, I came around a corner. There was a back bay. It was 1 to 2 foot of water. It was 2 foot out in the middle of it. Small bay. We'll call it 4 or 5 little acre bay. And right in the middle was a pot of mullet. I said, awesome, finally. So because the wind was blowing that day, I had to troll all the way around that bay on the kind of grinding in the 12-inch parts to get so I could cast into them with the wind because I wanted to be as quiet as possible and make long casts. And I caught 7 redfish in 30 minutes. And there was none left when I left there. There was none left. They quit biting. They were gone. Whatever happened. But that just goes to show you, I was casting the whole time looking for these mullet. I was hitting points. I was hitting potholes. I was doing all the things you want to do. And then I found, probably 50 mullet. It wasn't some gigantic thing mullet. I've literally caught fish when I've seen 2 or 3 mullet. Sometimes you might only see just a few mullet, but give it a try. Starting point, it gives you confidence too, because, fish are with the mullet a lot of times.
Yeah.
It's especially in the winter, they're really with the mullet. Whatever it is, a mullet or knocking up shrimp or whatever they're doing, they like to be around them. And so it's a confidence thing, and you got to fish with confidence. So, if you're going to, it's good to have that knowing that like, okay, there's mullet here, let's do some serious fishing and see what we can do.
All right. So in that instance, it sounds like you positioned your boat so you can, have the wind helping you out. I guess 2 questions. Did you cast into the middle of the school of mullet, past them, around them, side, left, right? What was your strategy?
Well, I will work, I'll work the clock, like they say, 10 o'clock, 11, 12. And this is what, and I'll answer your question. This is funny. I just remembered something that day. I had a white bait on. I use white a lot. I love white with a chartreuse jig head. It's just something I have confidence and I use it a lot. Mm-hmm. But I knew they were there, and I wasn't really, I caught one and then I made a few other casts. I'm like, I'm going to switch. So I went to the other end of the spectrum. I put basically a dark brown, like almost a black bait on, like golden brim. And then that caught 6 in a row.
Wow.
So I usually don't tell people to get too caught up in colors, but it does. And I like 2 colors, black or white. There's a million in between, but dark or light, you know what I mean? And I do love white most of the time. And I've used white in Panama City and Louisiana and then down at Charlotte Harbor. And I've done really well white baits with chartreuse jig head. It's just kind of my go-to. But every once in a while, they like that natural, the root beer or, golden brim or a darker one. Sometimes in the winter, they seem like they like that more than the white. The white's more of like a spring and summer bait.
Mm-hmm.
But I did work it. I worked it. And I normally, the area kind of told me where I had to cast because the deeper part was probably only a couple hundred yards by a couple hundred yards. So I was just kind of casting in that 2 foot of water. And if I got too far, I would be up in like the 12 inches of water and maybe get a little more grass. So, I was just casting and again, we talked about this in the seminar. I usually use a 7/6 rod, 10-pound braid, full of braid.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Not full of braid, 100%. Like have that reel as full as you can put braid on there. If you put too much, you might get a wind knot, cut it there, retie, and you got the right amount on. But you want full of braid. You really want that wind. And, I was making 50-yard casts, because I wanted to be way far away from these fish. And, I was catching them 30 and 40 yards out there.
Wow.
because and then after I caught a few, I would pull my power pole up, let the wind push me about 10 more feet, put it back down and start casting again and fishing more water. So I was kind of methodical the way I fished it. So I did start like on, my side of the hole, and then would go up 10 feet, power pole back down, cast again until I, had no more room to fish.
I love it. Question number 2, did you actually see fish? And here's where I'm going with that. We're seeing, some people who have never caught redfish before. Maybe they're bass anglers from Tennessee, or they're, up in New Jersey and moving down here. And I've seen this question multiple times in our community where all they've seen are like old fishing shows where all these redfish are tailing, right? And they're like, I'm not seeing any tailing redfish. There must not be any here. I'm like, that's not always the case. Redfish aren't always tailing, especially, in parts of Florida. It's not something you see every day. Did you see, and we're talking in 2 feet of water or less, did you actually see redfish? Did you see any tails, or is that?
I did not see a fish. And it's funny you should say that, because I was just joking. We always make fun of our Louisiana friends, because in Louisiana, for the most part, 95% of that fishing is sight fishing. You're on a casting platform. You're not even blind casting. You're seeing a fish. You make a cast to it. In Venice, it's more of a pop and cork thing because the water is dirty down there. But like in Delacroix and Homa and these places, it's very clear. And you're not blind casting because you can see so well. In Florida, our game is to go in an area where the fish should be and pepper it, just to make 100 casts. And they're not used to that. So we're like, when we get them to finally come over here and fish a tournament, they're just like fish out of water, for lack of a better way to put it, because they're used to seeing them, where 95% of what we do in Florida is fishing where they should be, and reading the water and fishing where they should be. I've literally, Florida, I can think of here, fishing. I've probably fished well over 100 tournaments. I might have caught 4 fish that I brought in that I actually saw. Wow. But the other 2 or 3 were blind cast in an area where the fish should be. It was doing the same thing I said. I look for mullet. I look for the right kind of bottom. I look for those kind of things, and if I spend 15 or 20 minutes there and there's nothing going on, I look for the same scenario again, maybe another 100 yards down the line.
I love it. All right. So back to off the water, going all over the place here, but I want to get a little bit of the intel there. You find out you got to go to a tournament and it's in a city you've never fished before. It doesn't matter where. What are you doing before you get on the water, before you can see those visual signs? Are you using just normal satellite maps? Are you talking to people? What are some tips that you could give an everyday weekend warrior to, hey, here's some tips on fishing a new spot?
Well, well, fortunately for me, I have a huge network, and I do get a little bit of information, at least somebody. I never ask people for spots. I like to hear about patterns and things like that, because I can usually find the fish. But for the most part, I might use a Google Earth type thing just to kind of look at what I'm dealing with before I get there. And again, I might just take a boat ride. I'm not running shorelines or anything like that. I might be in the intercoastal, might be just checking out the shoreline, looking for a cove or an oyster bed or a bunch of mullet or something like that. And I won't stop until I see that. Because you can, I think y'all even say on one of your videos, the fish are in, 10% of the area, 90% they're not. Yep. So, you can stop and fish 100 different places, but I need to see signs of life. I need to see some birds. I need to see the right kind of bottom, some oysters, especially seeing mullet before I ever stop and look at something.
I love that. And with our smart fishing spots, one of the first things that we're doing, we have all those different layers on the map, and there's one that says oyster bars on it. You click that sucker, and it's got pretty much every oyster bar identified. And this is not just Florida; it's in the Carolinas, it's in Georgia, and Texas. To me, that's a great place to start. And we found some in our own home waters that we did not know there were oyster bars there. We had passed by them; they were a little bit deeper, and lo and behold, we've caught fish at some of those spots. So I would say if you're listening, you're a member. If you're not a member, you need to join. But that's one of the easiest ways, in my opinion, to at least get a handful of starting spots to go check out first if you have no idea where to start.
Well, so oyster beds all have a racetrack around them. If you've ever went up to one and looked at it real close, on the outside edge, they all have, a little racetrack around it, tidal flow or whatever it is. I can't tell you how many fish I've caught in that whole racetrack. Now if you cast too far, you're stuck in the oyster. So you got to figure it out a little bit. But once you get, that's a little bit of time on the water thing. Once you kind of learn the oyster beds and how to make your cast to the side where you're not just throwing right into the oysters. But they love on the bottom edges of that, they'll circle them, they'll hang down there. You'll see a sheephead, you'll see a redfish, you'll see a mullet. They like to be around the bottom of those oyster beds where it just gets a little bit deeper. That's their spot.
Oh, I love that. And any of these tournaments, I know we've talked shallow so far. Are you ever fishing docks at all?
Yeah, there's in Panama City, I know that was a pretty good pattern. I've caught a few in Clearwater too. Clearwater's kind of got up by Seminole Boat Ramp north. There's a lot of docks up there that holds quite a few fish. We've been joking about wondering if this forward-facing sonar thing will come into play.
I know.
It's such a big bass. It's a big topic in bass. We're like, when's this going to come into redfish? And we can look at these docks. We wonder what's under there. Maybe we can see them. But, they're there. I mean, I don't do that well. Now, if it's an old dock that like, as a matter of fact, I won a tournament on some docks in Inglewood. But it was perfect because like up near the shore, it's like almost dry. And then by the end, and they're long docks. And by the end of the dock, it's about 4 foot of water. So you had dry to 4 foot of water and grass and kind of an older dock. So you kind of had several zones and we whacked them in there. And one of my first wins was down there in Inglewood at these docks. And, they were near the dock. That was more so, again, it was a broken bottom. It was a little bit of grass, a little bit of sand, a little bit of mullet, undulation. I don't like a flat that's like perfectly the same depth for a mile. I like one that's like sticking out of the water here and 2 foot over here and, in that kind of scenario. I like for changes. That's what I was talking about, edges. An edge could just be that this part of the flat's a little bit higher, or a little bit lower. Those changes that when I go to say Fort DeSoto or somewhere like that, some of that area looks the same for miles,
Oh yeah.
And it's tough fishing. It can be tough fishing. And you brought up tailing redfish and some of your guys saying, if you're not fishing real skinny and probably in the winter, you're not going to see a ton of tailing redfish. In Tampa Bay, they really don't tail a lot. I've seen tailors in Tampa Bay 10 times in 20 years.
Right.
But I've seen them in Inglewood and Fort DeSoto just about every time I'm there on the low tide. So I think it's something to do with what they're eating. Maybe it's bloodworms are more prevalent down there, or whatever it is they're looking for. But the most exciting thing you can do in redfish is to see a tailer and catch it. I mean, it is by far my favorite thing to do.
Yeah, just doesn't happen as often as people think it does in general.
If you're fishing 2 or 3 foot of water, you're never going to see a tailer.
Yep.
I've lived in 1 foot and under a negative tide fishing and all that stuff for years and years and years. And the reason I like low tide fishing is it condenses the fish. They don't have as much water to be lost in. You bring them into the potholes, you bring them out of the mangrove shorelines. You might need a craft, a kayak or a paddleboard or a skiff to access some of that. And that's kind of been a small boat guy forever because I love to be able to get to those fish.
Yeah, I love it. I want to pivot a little bit. When you and Captain Mike spoke in Tampa, both of you spent considerable amount of time talking about casting. And I think a lot people didn't expect that. And you're like, guys, and you already mentioned earlier, you're, casting 40, 50 yards. Casting is so critical. And you mentioned putting your braid all the way into the spool. I mean, even overfilling it was a whole lot better than having a half an inch or an inch gap in there.
Absolutely.
Talk about the casting part of it, and not just the importance, but just the importance of even practicing, and don't just wait until you get out on the water to do it.
Well, it's just about the most important thing you can do. It's the first thing I see wrong when somebody gets on my boat. A lot of times they'll take their stuff and put it in the gunnel and say, "You're not touching your tackle, you're using mine, because I'm not going to watch you struggle."
What do you see? Is it the rod, the reel, the how it's spooled up? What is it?
7-foot rod, broomstick with a 5,000 and not 20-pound braid halfway through the spool. They're going to cast 20 or 30 yards, and I'm throwing 60 with the wind. And, it's simple math. If you're throwing 30 yards and I'm throwing 60 and we're working a big flat, a pothole, in 10 casts, I've worked like a mile more water than you just did. And, and I mean, it's stuff like that, and it's not as much accuracy. Accuracy comes into, when you got to make a good shot on a tailor or something like that. But like I said earlier, in Florida, it's mostly just making big, long casts, and, it's, if at all possible, have the wind at your back. So, you get that help. I absolutely hate when the scenario is I have to cast into the wind. Oh, yeah. And it does happen because of the way I'm entering a flat or whatever it is. And I'll even go where it's a side, if I can, I'll even take the wind to the side, if I just can't get it at my back. So I'd rather have it at the side or than dead into it, because you just can't make those casts. And, the fish kind of know you're there, especially if you're on a trolling motor or something. You got to make a decent cast just to get to them.
Oh, yeah. And we did some of those studies. I don't know if you ever saw them. It was essentially casting contest, same rod reel, spooled up with the exact, literally down to the inch amount of braid. And we did 10 versus 15-pound braid, and then 10 versus 20, just to see what a difference that would make. I assume you're using 10 in most of these tournaments?
Yes. Yeah. 10 pound. I would love to have 15 and 20 on that rare occasion Moby Dick bites, or some crazy snook or something. But we pulled in houses with 10-pound braid and 20-pound leader. We pulled in some really big fish, because the bycatch in these tournaments, we have to bring in slot fish, 18 to 27 inches.
Yep.
But, some of the biggest reds, snook, trout, all that stuff is always a bycatch in a tournament. And I've caught some of my biggest snook, fishing for redfish and, in tournaments, and got them in, and it was with 10-pound braid, 25-pound fluorocarbon leader. And, luckily got him hooked in the side of the mouth. So, he didn't, break it, but, stuff like that. So until you're breaking off on giant fish, go as light as you can, I
agree.
You'd be surprised with a good feel, with good drag, a decent rod, and all this stuff, how big a fish you can actually get in.
Do you ever go under 10-pound braid?
I don't personally go 10. I have a couple buddies, and they're funny because they're really good fishermen. They use 8 on occasion, and I'll talk to them. I'm like, how'd the tournament go? Man, we broke off 3 times. I don't know. I said, dude, y'all break off more than anybody I've ever heard of. I don't know how y'all are doing this, but there seems to be something about like under 10 that's not as forgiving, and this just is my personal history of doing it. You know what I'm saying? 10 just seems like it handles just about everything. You still have that small diameter to make those long casts. And, it just seems like it just is the go-to braid,
I agree. My brother Luke, he'll go down to 8, and I think there's even a 7. Some company makes it, and I will say he probably gets more strikes, but has also, like you said, lost more. And I just stick with 10, just in case you hate to lose a massive fish or in your case a tournament winning fish because of your line.
Yeah, and there's been, many tournaments where only 2 fish were caught, so maybe it was full moon, bluebird skies, terrible tide, things like that happen, and we have to go fish in whatever conditions. And, we'll go lighter, if we have to, but, that's why I use a jig head with an open hook 90% of the time, because I've rarely had one come off that. I have had it happen, but rarely, where the weedless setup is a little less percentage wise. You really got to give it the Bill Dance hook set.
Yep.
But long as you're aware of that, you get better at all that stuff the more fish you catch. And because the jig head with braid that doesn't stretch and a decent rod, you can just give it a nice little solid hook set. You're good to go. With a like the Polk County tweaker buried in it, a weedless, you may have to give it a little bit of a Bill Dance type setup there and give it turn the screws on the fish a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And you kind of touched on it earlier, and this was the best advice someone gave me, because Luke and I, we grew up down there in that Port Charlotte area. The guy that worked for my dad had a little house on Little Gasparilla Island that he really kind of just let us use whenever, because he got too old to use it. And we would not go fishing without live bait. And when we made that transition, someone had said, hey, just stick with one lure. Like, don't take anything else. Literally take a paddle tail, or, we didn't have Polk County tweaker back then, but there's things like it jerk shad, whatever. And just stick with that one lure until you feel like that's your confidence lure. Then try some other stuff. And that was probably the best. And for me, it was a little paddle tail. But that was some of the best advice. Because otherwise, I don't think you mentioned you don't get great at any of them, and you never have the confidence like you've got with a couple year setups, and you don't get used to, like you said, setting the hook correctly on certain things. And because there's sometimes that redfish just turns and kind of does all the work for you, but many times you got to put some oomph into it to really get that hook set. So I if you're listening and you're either new or you're transitioning from live bait to lures, that's my advice: is pick one. It doesn't even matter what it is, but pick one lure, and just, even if it's top water in the summer, spring, just own it and do it over and over again until you're comfortable with it.
Yeah, and man, I'm serious. Like, I'll jump in somebody's boat and they'll be like, "Where's your tackle box?" I'm like, "Dude, I got my bait and shoe hook. I don't need anything else." Like, I know where we're going. I don't need a whole tackle box here. I got 3 extra jig heads, 2 bags of baits, a little bit of fluorocarbon, and some pliers. I don't need anything else.
Yeah, I love it.
Because I know that this stuff catches fish wherever I go. It's not going to be the bait. It's going to be whether the fish are eating or we find the fish or those kind of things. Because, a hungry redfish will eat a cigarette butt, I mean, they just are aggressive. So it's more about finding fish that are feeding, and those kind of things, than keep swapping baits. And I spent, probably 10 years ago now, I spent a ton of time with the topwater plug. I had a little place in Cortez that I went to on weekends. I went there almost every weekend, and I just would start every day with a topwater. And the one that y'all sell is that's the one that I would pick. That's like the spook style profile, if you want to call it that. But, that's a great, great plug. I have the most hookups. I have one of your plugs. I've used it. I've caught fish on it. I've had the most hookups. For whatever reason, I went through every topwater on the market, just trying and redfish, they miss topwater a lot.
Yep.
It's fun. Redfish love topwater. So in the summer and the spring, I start all my fishing trips with the sunrise and a topwater plug on. The first 2 hours, I'm throwing topwater.
Love it.
In the spring and even in the summer, I'm totally, I don't use the jig or the salt plastics. I get those a little later in the day, but from 7 to 9 in the morning, it's all topwater.
And the beauty of the topwater is with 10-pound braid, you can bomb that thing too.
Absolutely. And now I know I was preaching 7/6 rods, but with the topwater, sometimes I will use a 7-foot rod, because I typically have my tip down and I'm working and walking the dog, and I need that couple extra inches depending on where I'm standing on my boat.
Yep.
So I'm not actually dragging the water or something. So so you don't have to worry about casting distance with a 7-foot rod, because you got a topwater plug on there and you can throw it a mile anyway.
Well, that makes complete sense. I'm curious on the PowerPole, the Redfish tour and all these tournaments. There's been a lot of talk. You touched on it earlier in the Bassmaster, and the Classic just happened not too long ago with all the forward facing sonar. And I saw that one YouTube video where they we're interviewing all the different pros and seeing, I mean, one guy had 8 transducers on his boat and it was $55,000.
That's all.
Crazy. Are you guys seeing any of that stuff on the redfish boats, or are these guys still for the most part looking?
People, it has not crossed over to redfish yet. I've had 2 people that are trying it, and they're going to see, because there are some scenarios, like in Jacksonville, for example, there's quite a few fish in the intercoastal that you just can't see.
Yep.
And there's a chance you may be able to find them with some of these things. So I see it potentially coming over for certain areas. And like I said earlier, docks or something like that, it might help. The jury's out on that one. Maybe next time we talk, I'll say, here's what I know now.
Yep.
But I can see a couple of scenarios where the fish pull out. Maybe it's a negative tide and they pull out of all that skinny water and they're out in 3 or 4 or 5 foot of water and you just can't find them. There's a chance that could come in handy.
But for the most part, these tournament pros and even guys like you who have spent a lot of time on water, you're still reading the water with your own eyeballs and making casts.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Making a bunch of casts, long casts, and where the fish should be, and with your fingers crossed. And, the more you do it, I had a new guy with me. We were in Orange Beach, Alabama. We were IFA championship and we had never been there. We had no clue what we were doing. Said, well, let's just start scouting. And we rode for about 15 minutes and I pulled in somewhere and he's like, why are you pulling in here? I said, well, what do you mean? I said, there's a creek, there's a crab pot, there's mullet jumping. We went in there and caught two or three redfish. I said, he goes, how did you do that? I said, it looks just like everything we fish at home. I mean, I just said, there's a little creek coming out here. There's a crab pot halfway out of the water. So I knew the depth. There was mullet jumping. It looked great. It had grass and there were redfish there. We didn't see them until we caught them, but They were there. So it's just being able to recognize that stuff. And when you catch a fish, make a mental note, like, why was this fish here? And that will transition to other places you go to. I mean, there's some areas I fish in the South Shore and all that. I've literally catch fish there every year. They've been there for 20 years. They're still going to be there. It's just a perfect scenario for where they like to feed, where they like to hang out on different tides. They're still there. So when you learn that, and then you go to Steenhatchee or Panama City or somewhere else, and you see some of these same areas that look, there's a very good chance that's where you're going to find fish.
Yep, I love it. And another mistake is you're saying that, especially in the shallow water, if you catch one redfish, whether you're fishing by yourself or with friends, there's usually one more or many more with it. Right. I can only imagine how many times that you've caught a fish and caught another one, all in that same little school. The worst thing you could do is make a ton of noise and dropping stuff and jumping up and down in the boat, because I've seen that as well. When you get excited, if you want to get even more excited, be quiet and try to catch another one after you release it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, being stealthy and just, and that's why I don't mind the wind a little bit. The wind gives you a little bit of, helps you with your casting. It helps kind of keep the noise down. When there's not a breath of wind out, and the water's super clear and all that stuff, it can be a struggle. A little bit of bump on the water. Keep your noise down, run your trolling motors. If you got the wind at your back, you barely have to use a trolling motor. You can do quite a bit of drifting that way and just steer it occasionally. It's really important. It's the little things that make the difference. The guys that are really good at fishing, they do all the little things right.
Yep.
And the guys that aren't good, they're doing all the little things wrong, like not having enough braid and, making bad casts and making noise and not hooking their baits on straight. Just all these little things you put together. And it makes you, and it's the smallest little thing can be the biggest deal. So, it's the difference in a tournament. We only have to bring in 2 fish. And, the difference between winning and losing is just, doing one of those little things wrong.
So good. So good. What, anything else? Ken, I know you're on the way down to getting a trailer and heading to Louisiana for some tournament stuff. Any other tips or mistakes?
Well, time on the water, using, the apps I've seen you guys have, and time on the water, and just being able to recognize stuff. It's just really helpful. I mean, you can do a lot from a computer, but you really got to spend a little bit of time on the water, and you just get better at it.
Yep.
And here's the biggest tip: if you have friends that are good at fishing, go fishing with them. Okay.
Yes.
Because I have learned so much from my friends that are really hammers. And I love when, like, there's several guys that are my buddies that I've never fished with them. I've fished against them 100 times. And when it works out where we can go, I'm in everything they can do. And I may have more experience than they do, but I'm studying everything they're doing, because you pick up so much stuff from guys that are good fishermen, from their tackle to what they're doing, to where they're working their baits, all that stuff. It's really important. You can learn a lot from fishing with somebody that kind of has gotten you maybe a little more years than you have.
I love that. And another one to use is, regardless if you're in a boat or not, how you're positioning, your boat, your kayak, even if you're wade fishing, how you're approaching an area is critical. Because I've seen that mistake over and over and over again, where people are coming in so hot to a mangrove line or an oyster bar, or like you said, just casting right into the wind, just not realizing some of the small things that are just absolutely killing them. So that's
I literally see it every go out. that trip I told you where I caught 7 redfish, there were other boats around me, and they were off a little bit, a couple hundred yards, and they were casting their boats off. I was like, there ain't no fish where you are casting. You're not getting what I'm doing here. And it's just it's just a lot of little things. But if you remember anything, is have a full bunch of braid on your pole, long casts, wind at your back, sun at your back, being quiet, just the little things. Start from there, and good things will happen.
And look for mullet and edges. I've taken a mental note. So.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. Well, where can they go to follow you and the PowerPole Redfish Tour? What's the best website? And
we put a lot of information on our Facebook, PowerPole National Redfish Tour. And then our website is thenationalredfishtour.com. But PowerPole National Redfish Tour has a ton of information. It'll have our results, has a lot of videos, that's a lot of stuff on there. You can keep up with our tour and look at everything we're doing. And we do those go live tournaments. It's pretty cool, because we set everybody up that's fishing them as an admin. When they hook up, they go live for the catch, weigh, release. They all have the same scale. So it's a conservation friendly type tournament. It's fun to watch. We get tens of thousands of views on these tournaments, and we do those from Texas to the Carolinas to Florida.
So cool. Well, everyone go check it out. And
I appreciate. Yeah, I appreciate you guys. You guys are doing. I like to hook up with my Polk County boys.
Yeah,
you guys do some really amazing things, and you got some very, very good information. And this is coming from somebody that's done this from a long time. You guys have done your homework. You're putting out some really legit information, so you're really helping a lot of people out. And I can really appreciate that.
No, thank you. We're just like you. We're constantly trying to learn, and you fishing's like a never-ending puzzle, right? Just when you think you got it dialed in, you realize there's this whole nother, oh man, I got to put more pieces together, and it's something to learn every single time.
Every single time. I'm still learning now. I've been doing it for a long time.
Yeah. Well, my friend, thank you again, Kent. We appreciate you big time. And everyone go check out Kent there in the PowerPole Redfish Tour. And if there's anything we can do to help you out, man, let me know.
All right, bud. I appreciate it. And we'll talk soon.
Thank you, buddy.
All right, take care.
'Cause fishing, it's in my soul.